besties, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, welcome. My name is Grace, lovely to meet you. So for today's video, we're going to be doing my June wrap-up, which is so bittersweet to say because I feel like the summer is just going by so quickly and I am not ready to go back to school. I'm not ready to give up my reading all day in my bed routine for being a college student, so yeah. But in June, I read a total of 9 books. One of them was an audiobook, so let's get into it. The first book I read in June was Bloody Heart by Sophie Lark. This is the 4th book in the Brutal Birthright series. It's a mafia romance, dark romance, and second chance, so we love all 3 of those tropes. It focuses on Dante and Simone. Dante is the oldest Gallo brother. The Gallos are basically an old school Italian mafia family, and Simone is a daughter of like an aristocrat or bureaucrat or something, so she comes from a very wealthy and affluent family. Simone and Dante meet in a very unconventional way at some like charity event, and from the moment they meet each other, sparks fly. However, Simone's family does not approve of her relationship with Dante because they don't approve of his family, his background, his profession. They just think Dante is beneath them, basically. So they are forced to break up, and years go by. They've had 0 contact with each other, but then they are finally reunited. However, Simone is hiding a big secret from Dante, and she's worried it's gonna affect their relationship. So this was a 4 out of 5 for me. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I love Sophie Lark's writing so much. She is honestly the queen of dark romances for me. Her writing is always fast-paced, it's addicting, it's literal crack, I kid you not. And I finished this book in 1 sitting, so. And the thing I love about this book is that we see Dante throughout the whole series kind of being like sulky and grumpy. We know that he's had this past serious relationship, but he doesn't really talk about it. So it's nice to know like his secrets and his past in full length, because this book goes from past in the beginning and then it's in the present time, the second half of the book, so yeah. The second book I read in June was Kingdom of the Wicked. This is a YA fantasy romance. It's about Amelia and her twin sister Victoria. They are witches who secretly live among humans. And one night Victoria goes missing, so Amelia goes out to find her, but then discovers that her twin sister has been brutally murdered. So Amelia is obviously devastated by her sister's death, so she is on a path for justice. She wants to figure out who killed her sister and why. So she ends up summoning one of the princes of hell, Wrath, and together they share a common motive and they want to figure out who killed Victoria and why. This book has aspects of fantasy, mystery, romance, literally all 3 good genres right there, and it's basically what sparked my fantasy era. I have been an avid romance reader for about a year now, ever since I started reading again as an adult, and recently I've been wanting to branch out, and this was my first book that I read, and it literally ignited something in me. I have been on a fantasy binge ever since then, and it's so fast-paced, it's addicting, it's very beginner friendly. Like if you are looking to get into fantasy, highly recommend this book because the world building isn't very complex. There isn't any new like slang or terms you have to learn, and it's very romance heavy. Like even for a YA book, the tension, the slow burn, the enemies to lovers, so good. Fantasy enemies to lovers is like top tier. There's nothing that can beat that trope for me. It honestly doesn't even compare to regular enemies to lovers, I will tell you that. This book was a 4 out of 5 for me, and the minute I finished this book, I ran to get the next 2, so the next book I read in June was also a YA fantasy, and that was Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. This is about Evangeline Fox, and she is heartbroken because the love of her life, Luke, is marrying someone else, is marrying her stepsister of all people, but she knows something is fishy, she knows something is sus because Luke would not betray her like that. He loves her. So she goes to the Prince of Hearts to strike up a deal, and in order to stop the wedding, she agrees to give the Prince of Hearts 3 kisses. And the Prince of Hearts kisses are deadly, okay? If he kisses you, you are goner. So Evangeline does not know what will happen when she kisses these 3 people. But it definitely stirs up some trouble, okay? This was a 3.5 for me. This is a part of the Caraval trilogy, like the same universe, but you do not need to read the Caraval trilogy to understand this book. I did not, and I was completely fine. But I will say, after reading this series, I want to go back and read the Caraval trilogy because I just fell in love with the universe and the characters. So do with that information as you will. This book is very fairy tale-esque. That was probably my favorite part of the entire book. The universe that it's set in is so whimsical. I loved all the balls that she goes to. It's very beginner-friendly world building because, again, it's that fairy tale feeling. My biggest grievance with this book is that I was told it's a YA fantasy romance, and there was just not much fantasy for me, not enough, at least for someone who is reading fantasy mainly for the romance subplot. Oopsies, is that a red flag? Sorry. But yeah, there just wasn't enough romance for me. There were romance aspects, like, don't get me wrong, like the whole 3 kissing aspects, her true love, being in love with someone else, things like that. Like, there are very much romance aspects, but there was never a moment where I'm like, okay, that is the main romantic interest. I'm rooting for them. And I think that's kind of where I was put off personally, but yeah. So the next book I read in June was Kingdom of the Curse. This is the second book in the Kingdom of the Wicked series, and let me tell you right now, this book is not YA. I was told that this entire series was a young adult series, so when I picked up this book and it started off with a spice scene, I was very, very confused. But the second and the third book are very much new adult books. So just keep that in mind when you're picking up these books, okay? It was a pleasant surprise, but I was shocked to say the least, so. But this book for me was a 3 out of 5. My biggest issue was that 3/4 of the book kind of felt like filler. And I did really enjoy the universe and the characters and Wrath and Amelia's friendship, their banter, their enemies to lovers, the slow burn. Like, that was all perfection, okay? So good. However, it just felt like the same thing kept happening over and over again, and they kept talking about this big event that's gonna happen, and I'm like, okay, when is this big event gonna happen? And it wasn't really until like the last 100 pages where I was like, okay, here we go, like, it's happening. This book ends very, very strong, okay? It is action-packed, it is chaotic. I was literally screaming, crying, throwing up for the last 100 pages, okay? It was so good, and which is why I originally rated this book like a 3.5, 3.7, because the ending was so phenomenal. Like, I could not ask for a better ending. However, that's how the entire book should feel. It should feel like you're climbing up a hill, whereas this book kind of felt like that. Like, oh, we're stagnant, and then spike. And yeah. However, if you are reading this series, do not let this book deter you because it is worth it in the end. Okay, I will tell you that. It is worth it in the end. So the next book I read in June was Kingdom of the Feared. This is the 3rd and final book of the Kingdom of the Wicked series. And just to preference again, this book is not YA, it is new adult. There are spice scenes in it, so just keep that in mind. And this book was a 5-star for me, okay? I'm literally just speechless right now thinking about this book because It was amazing. It was everything I wanted to be and more. I absolutely love Wrath. It's so strange to say that the devil might be my favorite book boyfriend, but here we are, okay? Wrath is just a huge softie, and we love him for that, okay? We stan. But if there's one thing you should take away from this video is that you should read this series. Okay, I will not stop talking about this series because it is the perfect beginner-friendly fantasy series. It's very much romance-heavy. I really loved the fantasy aspects of it, but it wasn't too crazy that I was like completely lost. It's just so good. This book was so action-packed, it was fast-paced, literally finished it in one day. I did not want to put it down, and you won't either, so go read this series, okay? The next book I read was The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. This is the second book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. Again, it is a YA fantasy romance, and this book, it is a chef's kiss. It absolutely wrecked me, but in the best way possible. It was a 4.5 for me, and I literally cannot stop thinking about this series. I cannot wait until October when the third book comes out, but I'm worried because Stephanie Garber is always playing with my feelings, and I'm worried. I'm worried about what's gonna happen in the third book, okay? My biggest issue with the first book was that there wasn't enough romance, but this book solved that issue, and it was just so good. Again, this book does not have outward romance in it, but Stephanie Garber does this amazing thing where she leaves us crumbs. And she's like, here, peasant, here is a breadcrumb of romance. And you're just like, oh, thank you, Stephanie Garber. Thank you so much. And I loved every second of it. Jax, literally love him so much. I finished this book and then I went on TikTok for like 2 hours just watching like fan edits of him and Evangeline. Just so good. But this book takes off right after the first book, and I loved that because the minute you end the first book, you're left on a cliffhanger, and then you pick up this book and you're right back into where you left off. Like, there's no build up, there's no like, okay, here's what you missed. There's just, here's what's going on, here's the action, let's go. And then Stephanie Garber does this amazing thing where she like sprinkles in the background information so you kind of don't forget what happened in the first book. Just so good. Yeah, honestly, I don't know why it took me so long to jump into this series, but well worth it. So good. Literally mourning my days until the third book, okay? So the next book I read in June was The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This is the first book of the Crowns of Nyxia series, and in a nutshell, it's basically vampire Hunger Games. It's about Araya, who's the human adoptive daughter of the Vampire King, and she enters this competition because she wants to become a powerful vampire like her father. And this competition, it happens like every 200 years, and it's a series of trials, and whoever wins is granted a wish. So it's a pretty big deal. This book was a 4.5 for me. It was so action-packed and fast-paced. It was amazing. I literally could not put it down. However, I will say this is the hardest fantasy I've read so far. The world building is pretty complex. There's a lot to take in. There's a lot of terms and like slang that you have to learn. There's a lot of political issues that you kind of have to get your mind around, but it's worth it, okay? I was kind of worried that it was going to be a little too much. It was a lot. I had to go back and like reread pages to make sure I was understanding everything, but the minute you kind of get a grasp of it, it's so good. It was amazing. I also want to say that this book is fantasy romance. However, not a lot of romance in it, and you think that would have been an issue for me, but it really wasn't. I was so enraptured by this plot and like the story that was going on and the world that they're in that I did not care if there was a romance subplot. I know, Crazy for me, an avid romance reader, to say, but yeah, really did not bother me. I highly, highly recommend this series. I think there's gonna be like 6 books total. Do not hold me accountable for that. It might just be a duology, but yeah, highly recommend, especially if you are a fan of the Hunger Games or you like that kind of politicalness in a fantasy. So good. So the next book I read in June was Six Scorched Roses by Carissa Broadbent. This is technically a part of the Crowns of Nyxia series, but it can be read as a standalone. It's about Lilith and Vale. Lilith is terminally ill. She has known her entire life that her life expectancy is not going to be very long, and she has made her peace with that. She's from this like small farm town, and they are currently experiencing a famine and a plague, which has stolen thousands of lives from their village. So she decides to take matters into her own hands to find a cure, and she believes that vampire blood is the way to do so. So she goes to Vale, who's this vampire that lives on the outskirts of town, to strike up a deal in order to receive vials of his blood to experiment on. And I really enjoyed this book. It was such a quick and easy read. I really enjoyed the representation of having a main character that has a terminal illness or a chronic illness, and I really enjoyed the world building and just the universe that Carissa Broadbent has built around this series. It's so intriguing, it's so intricate and complex. Honestly, it's probably one of my favorite things about this series. I also really enjoyed having representation of a main character on the spectrum. It's never stated outwardly, but the way that Lilith talks about how she interacts with people and how she doesn't really understand how to read people's emotions, it's very much spectrum, on the spectrum coded, and I really enjoyed that aspect as well. However, if you were to read the Crowns of Nyxia series, I definitely recommend reading this book as well. It's definitely worth your time. It took me like a day to read. I read it in one sitting. It was very easy to read, very fast-paced. Highly recommend. So the final book I read in June was actually an audiobook, and it was Mr. Wrong Number by Lynn Painter. This is in an interconnected standalone series. I don't know the name of the series, but I know Love Wager is the second book in the series, and I listened to that book last month and really enjoyed it. So I wanted to go back and read the first book. The first book is about Olivia and Colin. Olivia has had her life flipped upside down. Her apartment complex got burnt down. Her boyfriend cheated on her. Her life is just a mess. So she goes back home to stay with her brother for a while, just temporarily. And one night she gets a text from some person, and they were obviously texting someone else, not her, and it was the wrong number. And that kind of develops into a friendship. So yeah, and then Colin is her brother's best friend and roommate. He's kind of like a finance guy. So yeah, it's Forks Proximity, Enemies to Lovers, and I think that those are the main 2 ones. This book was a 2.5 for me. I was not the biggest fan of it. I just didn't really like Olivia or Colin. It was definitely like a fun and cute romance, but their enemies to lovers just did not hit for me. I didn't really like the premise of the book. I didn't really feel their connection. I definitely liked Love Wager better. I really liked their characters a little bit better. And even like Jack wasn't even a big part of this book either. So yeah, sorry Lynn Painter. Sorry guys. I know Lynn Painter is like very hyped up. She's a very good author. A lot of people love her books, but she is just not for me, I don't think. So yeah. So that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please give it a big thumbs up. Comment down below what your favorite read of June was, and make sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos from me. I also have a lot of big plans for this channel, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. I also have a bookstagram. It's called currently.overbooked. It's always linked in the description. I post daily. I post reels, reviews, book updates, everything. So if you want to see more of my face, make sure to follow me on there. So yeah, I think that is it. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.